Welcome to explanatory and response variables. So the idea here is we are now looking at pairs of variables. We have, for now, two quantitative variables, but we can do this in fact with categorical variables as well. And to distinguish between the variables, we want to take sort of have one that is more likely to explain the other. So we are now looking at the relationship between two variables. And consider the fact that one variable is more likely to explain the other. For our definitions, I'm going to go with a very informal definition. The explanatory variable one moment, my screen seems to have frozen. The explanatory variable is the variable that is more likely to explain the other variable than vice versa. So in the last video, we were looking at height and weight. So if we consider height versus weight, it makes much more sense that someone's height might influence their weight than that their weight should influence their height. If someone suddenly puts on a bunch of weight, it doesn't logically make them taller. Whereas if someone gains height, they have more build to themselves. Most likely they will also gain some more weight. So it's not to say that an increase of height necessarily increases someone's weight, but it is more likely that someone's height will influence their weight than the other way around. Right? So it is more likely that an increase in height will result in an increase in weight. So we would say that height is our explanatory variable. The response variable is the variable that is more likely to be the result. Right? So the variable that is more likely to be influenced by the other. You can kind of think of it as cause and effect for explanatory variables and response variables, but not completely. Your height is certainly not the only determining factor in your weight, right? And so it's not that your height causes your weight, but it certainly can be a influencing factor. So again, for height versus weight, weight would be the response variable here. So for height versus weight, it would be the weight that would be the response. So I have a few examples just to sort of practice determining which should be the explanatory variable and which should be the response variable. So for our first pair of variables, we have homework grade and exam score. So the question here, is it more likely that your an exam score will influence someone's homework grade, or that someone's homework grade kind of can be viewed as an influence on their exam score or as a predictor, right? So in this case, it makes sense that if someone does well on their homework, someone is doing their homework, that it will result in them also doing better on their exams. It's not necessarily that their homework grade causes their good exam score, but it makes sense that whether or not they do their homework will have an influence on how well they do on the exam. So it makes sense that whether or not a student does their homework will influence their performance on the exam. So this would be our explanatory. So homework grade would be our explanatory. I'm just gonna write EXP for explanatory. And exam score would be our response. You can also think of it, in this case, this is gonna be sort of a sequential order of events. Your homework usually comes before the exam, so it makes more sense that your homework would influence the exam than the other way around. Next up, we have blood alcohol content versus number of alcoholic beverages consumed. So does it make more sense that the blood alcohol level or blood alcohol content will then cause the number of alcoholic beverages that you consume, or does it make more sense that the number of alcoholic beverages will result in the blood alcohol content? Right? So in this case, the number of alcoholic beverages or the amount of alcohol certainly should influence your blood alcohol content. In fact, your blood alcohol content is more or less a direct measure of how many beverages you had, and then also the time that has passed, and your weight are influences as well. So in this case, your blood alcohol content will be the response, and the number of alcoholic beverages will be the explanatory variable. And one more. Annual income versus years of education past high school. Right? One of the main reasons people go to school after high school is in an effort to better their circumstances, to make it so that they have the chance to earn more money. So it's much more likely that the years of education will influence your earning potential, right? And so therefore it will influence annual income. So again, annual income here will be the response variable. Years of education past high school will be the explanatory. Now, on the other hand, if we talked about your parents' annual income and then your years of education past high school, right? People whose parents have a lot more money are more likely to be able to afford uh, going to, say, a 4 year college or going to professional school after a 4 year college. So, if we were talking about your parents' annual income versus your own years of education past high school, this might be in reverse. But if we talk about just a single individual's annual income and their years of education past high school, their education will likely be a determining factor in their income. All right, so this is explanatory and response variables.